Welcome to CTO Think, a podcast about leadership, product development, and tech decisions between two recovering chief technology officers. Here are your hosts, Don Vandemark and Randy Burgess.
Hey, Randy, what's going on this week?
Holidays, lots of changes at work. I'm now much more of a management architect level person. Haven't really touched code for work much at all the last few weeks, which is fine. It's not a surprise. Just I don't think I've ever had a job where I coded this little since I left the CTO role at the finance firm 10 years ago. So it's just I'm like back to what I used to do at one point. But yeah, it's an interesting now the difference is bigger team, service-oriented architecture problems. With a code base I'm not really an expert at, Go, but I still know all the technology problems we're dealing with are things that are not new in the sense of like Go doesn't change it. Go's just a tool to solve the problem, but the concepts and patterns are all the same still. So just interesting in that regard. But what's up with you?
Not a ton. Wrapping up the year here, and as I wrap up the year, I've got time to focus on some things because it tends to get a little quiet in the facility maintenance business right at the end of the year because nobody wants you in their stores around Christmas. So you're only there for emergency fixes. What it's given me the time to do, though, is poke a little at some new tooling, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that today. And what I've been able to do is we're fully invested in the Microsoft ecosystem.
Yeah,
I made that decision over a year ago to switch off of what you do with a very small company, and that's use Gmail as your main mail, and just go ahead and buy the full Office 365 package that gets you all the Microsoft Outlook and everything for everybody. Went ahead and took that a step further and have been using Microsoft Flow and Microsoft Power Apps to build some tools that we've been able to use within the company. And the interesting thing about these is they're both what's called a no-code solution. It's a lot of pointing and clicking and constructing the different work pieces. If somebody's used a Zapier or if this then that, Microsoft Flow is the same thing. It's actually called Power Automate now because they have their whole Power Platform mantra that they're going by. So what Power Automate is it's just saying, okay, here's a trigger, and the trigger we've got set up is one example is we were able to kind of change the chasms tool that we put together to where I made the trigger be an incoming message from Twilio. And then you just go through step by step and say, okay, if this happens, then perform this step, save this file to OneDrive, create this Word document. Anything within the Microsoft ecosystem, Power Automate can do. It can even do things outside the Microsoft ecosystem, especially if there's an open API. But even if there's not, they've got some connectors. I would say the connectors probably aren't as many as there are with Zapier or if this then that, just because Microsoft's probably trying to keep it within their box as much as they can. But for the most part, that's worked for us. So it's been real interesting working through this no-code stuff, and I felt it was a good topic to talk about today about why why these things exist and what benefits they can bring to just about any company. Because what this does is this allows those that aren't developers to create processes that can help them or help their team or help their company as well.
So this has been, I mean, you're using this with Microsoft right now, but this has been Microsoft's goal since the dawn of Microsoft.
Yes.
When you look at all of the stuff that they've been doing. Now, it's a lot of it has been kicked to the curb over the years because it didn't work that great. But I think it's almost like Microsoft tried all this stuff to make no code, like GUI interfaces to build processes and workflows. And then none of that really stuck. And then if this, then that, and Zapier came back, and the the serverless movement came back, and now we're in this mode of, oh yeah, this is what we all want. This is what we were trying to do in the first place. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is great. I mean, when you talk about what people keep bringing up, everyone should code. I remember this ridiculous thing. I think Mayor Bloomberg in New York was like, I'm going to code. I want to learn how to code. It's like, you're a billionaire with a humongous technology team. I don't believe you know how to code at all, or that you need to. But the truth is that more and more people in the information economy need to be able to get computers to do stuff for them.
Right.
And not everybody has the time, or it's not really a talent thing. It's just more of there's a mindset around coding which has to do with debugging. Some people are great at debugging, have the patience for it, find it fulfilling, and some people don't. That's what I've always seen.
Right.
But when it comes to what you're using, I'm like, what my biggest question to you now almost is, what is the debugging story around what you're working on? How that's where I've always seen it fall apart. Because as a programmer, I need a lot of information to debug things. And those tools, I just caused a bug in my cat, I think. Those tools don't do that well. No. Feedback is bad. Tracing, stack trace is bad. It shields the user from that stuff, but when things go wrong, you don't know where the hell it went wrong. So that's what I guess I'm curious about. How do you debug what you're working on?
Yeah, I would say debugging, testing, and deployment are three areas that need work. And I'll go over all three. Debugging, to be honest, yes, there are lots of debugging tools in languages, but how often in a JavaScript program do you just console log something as opposed to actually using a debugging tool? And that's kind of what I've had to use within Power Automate. Is I just have it, if it reaches a certain condition, I just have it send a message to Teams, to Teams privately to me. Because there's no quote console for it to dump things into. So it just sends me a Teams message, and then I look for it and I go, okay. And I'll have it send the variable to Teams so I can work around it. Hand in hand with that is testing, and there's certainly no testing frameworks for it. That within the tool, there's a test button, and you have the choice of performing the trigger action yourself or using data from a previous run. And most of the time, you just use data from a previous run and you run through it. And then at the end of the test, you can open up each step and see the inputs and outputs from each step. So there's a little bit of knowledge there, but even that's very manual. I honestly went through at least one day, probably two, of trying to get a hold of a specific variable because it wasn't the flow wasn't working properly.
Yeah.
So it took me a day or two to figure out how to access the particular variable I needed to print it out so I could see what was going on. And it ended up that it was a string I was trying to treat as an integer. Which, if there's one digression, if there's one thing that Automate does, is it's very type strict.
Yeah.
And that's okay. It's just changing your mindset into being, okay, wait, this is a string. I need to make it an integer. Let me do this, and this to it. But it is very methodical. Back in the days of BASIC and COBOL, where you had to initialize variables, you have to initialize variables here within Automate. You can't just set a variable to something. You have to actually initialize it. So off my digression, testing and debugging, it feels a little like when you console log something within JavaScript. There's certainly no frameworks to help you with that. Deployment was another headache I had. So what I did at first was, these tools, this Power Platform, they have costs associated with them, as well they should. But they also had a plan available that said, hey, you can use this as they called it a community plan. And it was essentially, as long as you're not going to use this commercially, you can use this piece. And you get all the features for it, and it's one user, that sort of thing. So that's where I built my Power app at first, was within that. And then it was working, it was ready to go, and I was ready to move it to production. And I found out that the data and the database that I had built in this community plan, there was no step to say export that to production. There was a entry within the platform that said copy data out to CSV, and then on the production side import it, but it didn't work. And when I reported that to Microsoft, the answer was, you're right, try this other longer way of doing it. So it's still in the case of, it's not quite mature yet. I think it's getting more mature. But there's certainly that aspect that there are mines you have to watch out for, because that having to move that data cost me an extra day or two that it shouldn't have had to cost me.
So I'm the guy that has given you crap for being a manager, executive, doing the programming that other people could do, so to speak. I'm also the guy that deep sixed part of your production application, which forced you to do this. We're not going to talk about that on CTO Think, but let's just say I'm fired as your CTO. But the question is, compared to programming, I stand by my criticism before of, hey, maybe you don't need to be doing these hands-on coding things. This seems like the compromise we've talked about. But does it feel that way to you right now? Do you feel efficient at all? As an
incredibly.
Executive? Okay, you
incredibly.
do?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what this has allowed me to do even more. So I talked about how we replaced chasms, and that was one thing I built within Automate. The second thing I built for our team, and it's worthwhile going through the whole story so we can see how it made me efficient.
Yeah.
So the company has had about 7 months of 2019 were unprofitable, and about 4 or 5 were profitable.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to dig in and figure out why. So I literally we probably invoice 200 to 300 work orders a month. And all our data is between QuickBooks that shows me the invoice amounts and any billings that we get from any suppliers like Home Depot, Lowe's, commercial suppliers, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Any contractors, subcontractors that did work for us, so on and so forth. So I took close to 1,000 work orders and went one by one to take, okay, here's how much we invoiced. Here's how much our labor cost was. Here's how much our material cost was. Here's how much and then I put some calculation in place for overhead, for my salary, for the office staff salary, for all of that, and applied that against every work order as a percentage basis. And did that for, like I said, about 1,000 work orders. And what that showed to me was a couple things is, we also have for our technicians that go out and do work. They don't bid the work because they work directly for us. They have timesheets. They say, I spent 4 hours on this job. I spent an hour and a half driving to this job, and I went X many miles. So they have paper timesheets that they hand in every week. And what I found out was if a technician was going back to a certain work order over a few week period, so let's say they went to a certain job site for a certain work order 3 times over a 4 or 5 week period, sometimes we were missing one of those times they went. So we didn't bill for it properly. And it didn't happen once. It happened enough times. I was like, this is a problem. We got to figure it out. So what I determined is that it's just hard when you've got that many paper timesheets you're working through to make sure you got it all. So I built just a small little tool within Power Platform, within the Power Apps platform. Again, no code, but it's essentially a point and click IDE where you drag things in. I built a small couple little database tables for it. And it's essentially where somebody can sit down, take a paper timesheet, and just enter all the information in it. And then what that allows us to do is when we're going to invoice, we type in the work order number and it shows all the time entries for that work order.
Yeah.
So that took me from the day I started to the day I finished, it probably took me 5 part days to get that complete. Not 5 full days, but parts of 5 different days to get that working.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to essentially eliminate a problem. Now, it doesn't completely eliminate the problem. You still have the human step of entering those work orders. And if they mistype a number, you might still miss something. But it's one step closer to eliminating some of the human interaction in it. So that felt to me like an efficient use of my time. That solved a definitive problem that the company was having that more people wouldn't solve. Better training might solve to a degree.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, the more you can take each step out of a human hand and put it within a central data structure so that your human steps are less, the better off you are. So that's the best answer I can give you as far as why I think it's efficient.
So I bop you on the head with a rubber mallet just to be nice, and you lose the ability to remember how to code.
Okay.
So now you're a normal executive.
Okay.
What are you able to do with this thing now?
All right. So what you're saying is I've lost all knowledge of JavaScript, Pascal, PHP, all that knowledge I've lost. but I
Well,
still have the problem solving ability that a developer has.
that's what I'm saying. You kind of lost, like you
Okay.
forgot how to be a developer. It's been, I mean, maybe you know how to use Excel.
Okay. And what I'll say is that it's not for everyone. Okay.
Mhm.
It certainly opens the door. It's a lower barrier of entry. What you can do with it is I can set up people who are not developers. I can say, here's Microsoft Flow. Here's 1 or 2 videos. Go build something small. Have it do something when you receive an email,
Yeah.
and work through that on, in between calls or whatever. Just work on it for the next couple weeks and see what you can build. That I absolutely know I can do. Are there just going across my lifetime of work, are there people that I've worked with that I'm like, no, you're not touching this? Absolutely. But that's true of any tool. You wouldn't give any tool to anyone. You got to figure out who the right people are for it. So I think the short answer to that long answer is I'm going to give this to people who I think in another life could have been a developer, even a junior one, but not necessarily for everyone. Just because, to go back to your example of Microsoft has been doing this since the beginning of Microsoft. This is what VBA scripts in Excel were, right? It
Yeah.
was just this was 15, 20 years ago within Excel, the ability to make Excel do more than what Microsoft allowed you the ability to do. And those weren't necessarily developers doing that. Those were just people in offices who were really good at Excel.
Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly not of the mindset that because I'm a programmer, I'm doing some crazy better stuff than most people. And when people tell me, oh, I don't know how to program, I've had people like, I'd say, show me the most complex Excel document that you have to work with. And they'll show me this thing, and they've been doing macros and calculations, and, they're doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And I'm like, this is programming. You just don't think it is. You think it involves like a page of text that makes no sense to you. But it's all programming. It's all, at the end of the day, you're just abstracted from the direct interface with the CPU to process the binary code. But you're still giving instructions to a machine, and that's what programming is. So I think what you are using with Microsoft is awesome. I'm just wondering, like, is this just another iteration that won't pan out? Because if this, then that, um, is even better than Zapier with letting people build workflows with just very little logic. And I'm wondering, like, how do you see, are they going in with the training? Like, how the Firebase has just tons of videos and a whole like support team designed to train people. Like, is Microsoft doing that kind of stuff for this?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where Microsoft is different than most companies, and not necessarily in a better way.
Hmm.
And I've said this once or twice before, and it's what turned me off to Microsoft back in '98 when I was trying to replace the CMS I was using for fantasy football. I needed to make a change, and I stayed away from .NET due to the cost.
Yeah.
So Microsoft has stuff out there, and they've got a nice development website, even for Automate and Power Apps. That's fairly straightforward on how to do it. They also have conferences galore. Microsoft has at least, around, I'll say, one conference a month
Mm-hmm.
on different aspects of their tooling. Sometimes it's the whole Power Platform. Sometimes it's just Power Apps. They've got, road shows where they go to different cities and do, a day seminar on these things. The online stuff's pretty good. Where you run into problems is and it's the same with anything. It's been around long enough that if you Google it without time boxing your search, you end up with answers from 4 years ago that don't work today because of changes in the platform. So
Yeah.
that's about the only concern I have besides the money. I passed on going to one of the Microsoft conferences this year. That was right here in Orlando. So all I had was the conference cost because most of those talks end up online. So that's what I'm going to be doing over the next couple months is going through some of those talks, seeing how effective I can pick up on it, and then maybe go to that conference next year.
Well, I mean, I think, the whole, even Firebase tries to abstract a ton of stuff for a programmer. Like I benefit from this type of stuff now. It's just that now you're seeing more of these workflow builders and stuff that are trying to make it so you don't need to know JavaScript. You don't need to have that headache. So, but the education is still there. Like you still can't expect people just to plug and play.
Right.
The question is, I think, if you're a CTO right now, you have a team of programmers. Do you insult them by saying, "I want you to use this this Microsoft version of Zapier versus coding"? Like I still talk to companies who have developers, cranky developers on their team, and that developer won't use a framework like React. They're just going to use vanilla JS because they can do it better in their mind.
Right.
Of course, none of that crap is maintainable once they're gone because you can't Google the framework that this person built themselves. Like it's still a framework. So the question is, could you get away? And I don't think either of us can answer this, but it's more of a theoretical. Can you get away with having your programmers use what they would consider abstracted tools?
I would caution against it.
Yeah.
Simply because I think if you've got developers in place and you have the ability to prioritize their time to solve your problems, I do think that you can solve your problems with their work more efficiently with code. Microsoft has enough hooks into their stuff that you can certainly work through pulling things from email, pulling things from Word, Excel, SQL Server, wherever it is, to where doing it as a developer is going to be more efficient. You don't have to fight through some of the workarounds you have to fight through when you're doing it in a no code environment.
Yeah.
What this opens up is it opens up the ability for non-developers to solve team problems. So whereas before you need to wait on the IT department or the development team to complete a certain tool for you, you can certainly take one of your non-developers that are able to problem solve in a developer way and give them this tool and do what I said. Just start with hey, try to make it do something when you receive an email. And then once you have the knowledge of the basics of it down, go use it to try and solve the problem. And if you run into issues, then we can work through that. And what I think I want to do here today is encourage the CTOs out there to embrace this as opposed to fighting this. I know within my career, I've run across some companies that are very against quote shadow IT organizations or shadow IT efforts, which is something that's done outside of IT. If as a CTO you embrace this effort and you provide the training and the support for it, you get to make it part of what you do, and you're expanding your resource base while doing it. You can make the business units do some of your work for you, is the best way to put it.
Yeah, and I totally think that it's going to always start with the non-programmers having more power. That's what these tools are built for. But, and this is the risky part for a manager, what I always care about is maintainability of code when I have a team. And that's why I kind of side eye on programmers who think that everything that they do is the best, when it's like, yeah, but I have to worry about the hit by a bus scenario, or you leave and then I have to maintain your custom everything solution. And the question to me is, am I better off hiring expert, what's this thing called again? Power, whatever. Forgot the name of the
Yeah, it's a
application.
power platform. You've got Power Apps, you've got Power Automate, so on and so forth.
Are you better hiring expert power people than straight coders? Now, it's all depending on the custom nature of your application, but what would you start? Would you look? I guess the question is, do you see value in hiring people that are like, oh, I'm really great at Zapier, if this then that, and Microsoft Power Code people, or Power Code features? Is that a more attractive developer in the future?
It's an option, and I would say it depends on the size of your team. Um, I wouldn't necessarily make it like your first or your second developer. Maybe it is your first developer, and that's a direction you could go. Is you can make it your first developer within the IT staff, and then all they are is they're enablers. They're the ones that tackle the more complex work you're trying to do. Again, it's unlikely in today's world that you can get away with a lot of businesses without having code written for you, whether you write it internally or outsource it.
Mm-hmm.
You can, in the build buy decision, you can buy a lot of stuff, but eventually you need somebody to put some of that stuff together for you, I think. So I would say in that mid size IT department, that's probably the wrong spot for it. If you've got a large IT department, sure, one or two that can handle complex things is great. If you've got a small one that can handle the complex things and do some training to the non-developers is also fine. I do think that this is a direction you could go. Again, with the caveat that you are fully invested in the Microsoft ecosystem. If you're using Gmail for your mail, obviously, I don't think this works for you. This even pushed us from Slack to Microsoft's Teams tool, which is essentially the same as Slack, but now I'm even more into the Microsoft ecosystem because I can build triggers off of Teams.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a great move. I just, you're never going to get fired. You're never going to get fired from your family business, but you're not going to get fired for going with Microsoft. Like, there's a lot of security and risk management you can get away with,
Right.
and which is completely makes sense. Like, Microsoft has always been the company that supplies these tools. I mean, I'm working on a MacBook and I'm still using Office.
Right.
Because the company pays for it. Like, people still buy into the core Microsoft stuff. Emails where it all fell apart. I don't ever understood what I failed so badly there, but Gmail just ate their lunch on that one. But for what you're talking about, like, I don't trust Google for what you're saying that Microsoft is doing with this power code stuff. If you were to say, well, Google's going to do that for people, I'd be like, yeah, I'd trust Microsoft more.
Oh yeah, I agree, 100%.
I don't trust that Google won't retire it because their engineers get bored with it later on anyway. But
And
Microsoft
let's
won't do
talk
that.
about why that is. Right. The reason that is because there are hundreds and thousands of companies who are in the Microsoft ecosystem who pay Microsoft good money for that ecosystem. So when Microsoft provides something within it, they are much less likely to take something away and not give it support. Now, whether that's because they have the money, because they're charging for it, or because they feel obligated because they're charging for it, either one's fine. But that's the reason that Google will all of a sudden one day go, yeah, we're not supporting that anymore, is that it's outside of their business interest because there's no money generation out of it.
Yeah, and I just right now I do like that there's competition in the space. Like, I think that Microsoft has always had the problem of they were leading in the movement into this by themselves, and there just wasn't a lot of competition that was showing them there's a better way. And maybe Zapier and IFTT is kind of showing, oh, there's a better way to do it, or you can tweak it to meet that,
Right.
to do it right. And maybe that's it. I mean, honestly, I feel like getting punched in the face by the industry, as Microsoft kind of did, maybe is why they're starting to thrive again. They're
Right.
actually, they joined the community and quit making everything their own isolated management choices. And I mean, they're still Microsoft, but I feel like I don't have the same feeling about their choices as I used to, which
Yeah, I
were,
agree.
and now it's almost funny because Google seems to be going the other direction, with AMP and some of these other requirements, and the way search is just totally gamed by advertisements and stuff. There's a shift. And so anyway, yeah, I want to hear more about this as you learn more and get more things done. What I'm most interested in is if you're able to shift some of this work to other people.
Yeah.
Not to not to criticize that you're doing it, but just you know, I want to hear more about this, because I think this is where, when they talk about the automation of work and where do the miners go for jobs kind of thing, it's like, I think this is what we are really talking about. I don't think it's all just JavaScript programmers. I think it's people that are bridging that business technology gap with these types of tool, the glue. That's the future more than anything else. So
Sure.
I like to hear about this stuff.
And I do plan, it's not right now because I don't think I know enough, but I do plan sometime in 2020 to introduce this to at least one of the members of my team and say exactly what I said. Go make it do something. And then once you make it do something trivial, see if in your mind you can come up with ways that you can make it do something important, and go work on it. I give you the ability to have that time to go do that, and that's a growth opportunity for them as well.
Yep. So, anything else you think is of interest on this?
No, I think that's pretty much it for today.
All right, I like it. It's good to talk. We'll keep talking about it as you execute more stuff. Maybe we'll see more articles. I mean, there was a blog post I shared with you. I didn't read the whole thing, but it basically was talking about this whole automation is the key, not programming.
Right.
And I think we're going to see more and more. I think this is the direction we're going to start seeing this technology business articles going, because it's going to empower more people. So the question is, how good are the tools? And
right.
Right now I'm looking at different solutions for things like my company. The company I work for right now likes to do everything themselves. So this would never be something they would do with what we're talking about today. But even now, I still try to think, okay, how do we not keep building things ourselves? And I try to present those opportunities, even though they get shot down. So I'm still trying to automate stuff with pre-existing tools in my own daily work. And we're not going to use Microsoft, but other companies are providing things. And that's what I really want to aim for.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
We'll keep talking about it. All
Sounds good.
Talk to you next week. See you.
Thanks for listening to the CTO Think podcast. Show notes and previous episodes can be found on our website at ctothink.com. Reviews on Apple iTunes are always appreciated and help promote the show. Patreon contributions help us to produce episode transcripts, which allow people that are deaf or hard of hearing to access the show. If you have feedback, ideas, or want to be a guest, please email us at hello@ctothink.com. Show music is Dumpster Dive by Mark Wallach, licensed by premiumbeat.com. Voiceover work by meganvoices.com. You'll hear from us next week.